this makes Latin America probably the most pro-Ukrainian region of the global south. Now Venezuela is effectively controlled by Russian advisors. It has to combat this way of thinking that is unfortunately widespread in many places of the world, that implies that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Do a very simple operation by showing the similarities of the historic conditions of Ukraine and of those Latin American countries that have been historically suppressed.
Hello and welcome to Ukraine in Flames, a special project by Ukraine Crisis Media Center and NGO Euro-Atlantic course. My name is Anton Pechenkin and I am a coordinator of the UCMC Press Center. Please support us with your likes and commentaries and subscribe to our channel. Today's topic is Latin America, a pro-Russian continent. International coalition in support of Ukraine in this aggressive Russian war is wide but still geographically limited. Sanctions against Russia were imposed by most of the European countries, United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand and Japan. Other world's superpowers as China or India keep their own game, and we pay attention to this in our project. But there is almost a half of the planet, so-called Global South, which is another field of diplomatic struggle between the Ukrainian cause and the Kremlin's aggressive plans. Today we will discuss Latin America. Russia has old and strong connections in this region with more than 650 million population. Some countries here are openly pro-Russian. Some other leaders make ambivalent statements about the ongoing Russian invasion in Ukraine. Finally, this continent is very far from Ukraine, with not so many ties with us. That's why there is a stereotype that Latin America is mostly pro-Russian in our case. In order to make the situation clear and break some stereotypes, we invited Denis Pilash, Latin America-focused analyst. Denis was very kind to speak with me in his birthday, so please support his work with your likes and commentaries. In the first part of the conversation, Denis profiled the general situation with the government's position and opinion polls in the key countries of the region.
Well, the situation is a bit more complex, if not a lot. So obviously the remoteness of our regions, it causes the processes in one and another region, they are often discarded as something not so important on the regional agendas. And this also leads to them being viewed through the lenses of other important actors. This applies for Ukraine and for Central Eastern Europe as well, when we also seem to reduce very complex issues that are going on in other regions to some very basic, very simple dimensions. However, it should be said that actually the majority of Latin American states on the most crucial vote in the United Nations, in the General Assembly on 2nd of March, this resolution ES 11 on the aggression against Ukraine, almost all of them voted in favor. So we can say that besides some countries like Nicaragua, Cuba, Bolivia that abstained, and Venezuela that was absent, all others voted in favor of condemnation of Russian aggression. And actually, this makes Latin America probably the most pro-Ukrainian region of the global south, actually. And if we, it can be said that there is a significant portion of population here that have some sentiment towards Russia across the political spectrum. So some people on the left who harbor some nostalgia for the Soviet Union, they seem to somehow view modern Russia, modern Moscow as in some way continuation. That is obviously not adequate. Other people on the right, they also seem to view Putin as some example of a strong authoritarian leader whom they would adhere to. However, the majority of population, as polls here indicate, they are very clear in their condemnation of Russia's aggressive policy against Ukraine. So if we pick, for instance, the surveys in Brazil, we'll see that all of them indicate that the clear majority, more than 50%, are firmly on the side of Ukraine in the conflict, and only 8% or like that are supporting Russia. Regarding, for instance, Mexico, it's pretty the same. So 60% hold a negative view on Putin. 70% condemn his war of aggression against Ukraine, and only 20% or so are in favor of Russia's position. So we can see that even in this region, the firm pro-Russian position is still marginal.
So, if the general public in the Latin American countries has more pro-Ukrainian attitudes, ask I, why didn't any country of the region impose sanctions on Russia? Let's listen to the answer.
Russia is a rather weak economy. So besides some examples like Venezuela, that is reliant on both Russian military and political aid, and also on this oil markets conjuncture, all other countries aren't so interested in having this economic ties with Russia. However, they still opt for not so harsh reaction, because this is still viewed as some remote conflict and it's better to stay non-aligned. However, we can say that there's lots of Latin American producers, Latin American companies, they being not reliant on Russia, but rather on either China or the United States and the European Union, many of them have actually cut their ties with Russia, and Russia was immediately excluded from some important regional events, starting from, the major Latin American air and space tech fair that is hosted this year in Chile. Some important for Russia these directions, they are now also closed for its companies in the region.
My next question was dedicated to the list of pro-Russian regimes and governments: Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, and Brazil. What are the causes and how their position could be changed? For instance, petroleum from Venezuela is now the main source to replace the Russian oil in Europe after the sixth package of sanctions of the EU. Could it change the position of Maduro's government? Also, this autumn the presidential election will happen in Brazil. On the first glance, there will be fighting between two Putin sympathizers, Bolsonaro and Lula da Silva. However, the situation there isn't so one-dimensional. In addition, Denis portrayed the concerns and ambitions of several governments which stay neutral. So, Mexico is offering itself as a ground for future peace talks between Ukraine and Russia. Let's hear the details.
We can say that Nicolas Maduro's regime, he depends a lot on this support of Russia, and contrary to his predecessor, Hugo Chavez, who tried to convey some way of independent policy, becoming some independent pole of influence. Now Venezuela is effectively controlled by Russian advisors. Entire sectors are controlled by this meddling from Russia. Venezuela cannot cope with its crisis for almost a decade, and actually it's really striving for some normalization of relations with the United States, and lifting those sanctions that actually prevent Venezuelan oil from getting to more places. So actually, it very depends on this outcome of open and covered negotiations between Caracas and Washington. The same actually applies to, for instance, Cuba. The end of administration of Obama administration, it was marked with this thaw in relations with Havana, and actually then Trump administration, it reintroduced all the previous sanctions and almost 300 more. So the Cuban government was hoping that Biden administration will switch back to this Obama-style policy. However, it kept these sanctions intact. So now they also want to get some concessions on the side of the US. And in exchange, they may loosen their ties to Russia as well. Speaking about other pro-Russian leaders in the region, so
Bolsonaro.
a part of, yes, we have some smaller players who are again very dependent on Russia, like Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua, or we have people like Nayib Bukele, the increasingly authoritarian president of El Salvador, the crypto guy, who made also some strange comments in the social media that the real war isn't waged in Ukraine, it's waged somewhere in the West, and so on. So we can say that something similar was also promoted by President Bolsonaro. So Jair Bolsonaro, being a representative of this hard right tendency in Latin America, he has a soft spot for authoritarian leaders like Putin. It's worth mentioning that along with Hungary's Viktor Orban, Bolsonaro was one of the guests of Kremlin just prior to the invasion, and also they had very similar feedbacks that there will be no major incursion, and that our glorious leaders have been very important to preserve peace in Europe, and so on. And then after the invasion, he also even got into a spat with his own vice president, who was in favor of supporting and even arming Ukraine, while Bolsonaro was also making some derogatory comments about Ukraine and about Zelensky, a comedian elected president, and still Bolsonaro is showing his admiration towards the figure of Putin. However, it's now quite important to follow the events in Brazil, because the country is looking forward elections this autumn, and it seems that the runoff will be between Bolsonaro and Lula da Silva, who used to be a president not long ago as well. And it seems that Lula will be the winner. And we have also some worrying comments on his side.
So Lula seems even to be even more pro-Russian than Bolsonaro.
So he made these comments where he claimed that Ukraine is in the same way responsible for the war, and that the West was also responsible. So you cannot say blame Putin, you need to blame Zelensky as well. So these were some particularly worrying signals from his side. And it's now quite important to get Ukrainian position explained and conveyed to this sector of Brazilian population, because again, it may resonate with some, his comments may resonate with some of his constituency. However, they don't resonate with the majority of the population and the public opinion in general. And what we know from Lula's previous experience in the government, that he wasn't so principled. He was actually more pragmatic, opportunistic guy. So his policies may really align with something more pragmatic. So in case when it's more useful for them to abandon this Russia appeasing line, they will opt for this. And we can also mention another important leader in the region, that's Mexico's AMLO, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, who had also some similar comments to Lula. So he was also trying to emphasize that how he's non-aligned in this conflict and how we can have questions to both sides and so on. However, at the same time, Mexico was also pitching itself as a possible place for negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. And actually, it has some history, some tradition of being this some kind of neutral ground for such events. And so it seems like they try to present themselves that now, when the majority of some places in Europe are closed for such kind of negotiation, mediation, so they can be in this line along with Turkey and some other players. So again, it's a bit more complex situation.
Aside of enemies and neutrals, Ukraine has several friends on the continent. First of all, there are Colombia, Argentina, and Chile. Denis Pilas described the situation about them and what official Kiev and the Ukrainian society must do to strengthen the pro-Ukrainian attitudes on the continent.
We can say that at this moment, Ukraine got some verbal support, mostly from a number of Central American countries, for instance, and probably the most vocal from South America at some point was Colombia. However, this was, again, this continuation of this logic that we support those side regarding what's our position on the United States. So President Duque, who used to be a close ally of Trump, and now he also tries to still hold this line as United States' most important ally in the region. He was very quick in showing his support for Ukraine. However, this made little for improving Ukraine's image in the region, because Duque is again known for suppressing protests in his own country a year ago, and even in their elections they will have this second voting on 19th of June, and the candidate whom he supported, he didn't even make it to this runoff. So actually, we also enjoyed some support from other South American leaders as well. For instance, Argentina's President Fernandez, after a short period of hesitation, actually also stood in line with the majority of the West and the majority of the global community in condemning the invasion, and also showing some verbal support for Ukraine. And probably from the left-leaning leaders in Latin America, Chile's President Gabriel Boric was the most vocal in, again, condemning Putin's invasion and showing solidarity with the Ukrainian people. So we have this already a number of governments that are open for more intensive cooperation and more significant solidarity. However, we still lack, Ukraine still lacks resources on this diplomatic front. And also, it has to combat this way of thinking that is unfortunately widespread in many places of the world, that implies that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and thus Russia, that is portraying itself as some kind of counterweight to the United States, has to be supported by those who are critical of the US dominance in the world. However, we can do a very simple operation by showing the similarities of the historic conditions of Ukraine and of those Latin American countries that have been historically suppressed, first by their colonial overlords like Spain and Portugal, and then by the US constantly meddling to their internal policies, also even with open invasions. So actually, we have a situation when a traditionally hegemonic imperial player and historically oppressed nations. So this is the same template for those countries in Central Eastern Europe that have been oppressed by Russia, and those countries in the Latin America that have been viewed by the US as their backyard. And with this simple message, we can get more sympathy on the sides of Latin American peoples, who will also see these parallels in their historic development and see all these dangers of Russian invasion, because it's obviously it goes beyond the regional problem. So it's completely disrupts the international order and international security. And for instance, again, these Latin American countries in general, they support the right of Argentina to own the Falkland Islands or Islas Maldivas, because they view the UK as an imperial agent from abroad who grabbed some land in the region. And with the Russian invasion and Russia's grabbing more land and killing thousands of innocent people, this situation is even more stark, and it has to be shown to the Latin American populations, and probably even more to their leaders, why it's so important to be in solidarity with those who are now fighting their imperialist aggression against their country. So standing in solidarity with Ukraine.
My last question was dedicated to one of the most painful subjects of the world, the upcoming food and grain crisis due to the sea blockade of Ukrainian ports by the Russian fleet. Spoiler, yes, it will harm Latin America, even though it's a grain exporter itself. Also, Denise draw possible spheres for the future cooperation between Ukraine and the region.
So the food crisis is very crucial. It's a huge danger for the entire world, primarily for the peoples in Africa and the Middle East. Latin America has its own food producers. So countries like Argentina and some smaller ones like Uruguay, they are important players on these food markets in the world. However, all this also interconnected. And for instance, they need chemicals and the food crisis is enhanced by Russia not only by preventing shipment of Ukrainian production of food industry, but also preventing these imports for Ukrainian chemical industry as well. And also, this is also a reason because Russia is also an important producer, and some Latin American countries, they do buy these chemicals for their agricultures there. So actually, this means that the situation in Ukraine, it affects, and the sanctions and so on, they affect some sectors of some countries there. Actually, Ukraine has a lot of other stuff that could be even more important for these South and Central American nations. And we tried to build more cooperation in more high-tech spheres. In first it was airspace, then it was some IT connections, but they are still not so significant as they deserve to be. So actually, we hope that Ukraine and Latin American countries, they can build more fruitful cooperation. Probably also in this even in these terrible times of war and crisis, because actually our economic interests, they align in many spheres, many fields, and Latin American countries can also be part of this support for Ukraine for its reconstruction after the war, and Ukraine can be more active. Ukrainian producers can be more active as Latin American markets as well.
You have been watching Ukraine in Flames, the special project by the Ukraine Crisis Media Center and NGO Euro-Atlantic course dedicated to the Russia-Ukraine war. In description there is also information how personally you can help Ukraine against Russian aggression. And if you find our job interesting and useful, please like and share this video and subscribe to our channel. Thank you again, and everything is gonna be Ukraine.